Walk elements have a lot of properties that you can change. You can change the stitch type, which seems kind of funny for just a linear element, but you can, and there's a lot of things you can do with it. And then you can also change how those needle penetrations hit. So let's look at some of the walk properties. On screen, I have just some walk elements, and let's select one, right click, go to properties. Yes, there are properties up here, but there are a few more in the properties window. So I'm going to move this kind of over here so we can see a little bit more. Now I have tie stitches turned off for these so that we are just looking at the walks themselves and we don't get extra little stitches at the end from ties. But let's look at first the stitch type. And the first stitch type is normal, and that is just one stitch right after the other. So for a walk normal, we have the stitch length, and that is just the distance between the stitches or between the needle penetration. So if I measure, now I just measured and I'm not hitting exactly 20. Well, if I did exactly 20 between here and here, I would end up with one really kind of different stitch. So you're going to get really close to what your specified stitch length is, but it's going to give you a very even look between input points. And one thing we should be careful with, if you add input points, you will sink needle penetration. So no matter what I put in here, it's going to get close to that on longer bits, but on segments that are short, it may add a needle penetration to try to even that out. And if I get really crazy with these input points, I'm sinking a lot of needle penetrations in here, and that's probably going to be a thread break. So every time you click, you are putting in a needle penetration, no matter what the stitch length says. So I'm going to delete those. That's one reason I try to use as few points as possible when digitizing, so that my properties have the most kind of control over those elements. So this top element has a stitch length of 20, and we're pretty close to that. And if we look at the stitch list, yeah, we're hitting 19 points. We're really close to that. This element below it, I have set to 40. And if we look, yeah, we're hitting around 38. That's really close to 40. And you can see, yeah, I get 2 stitches in the top one for every one in the bottom one. It just kind of evens that out. If I select both of these and I just move them a touch, notice that my stitches didn't really change as far as the count goes, but they did get just a touch longer. Now I'm at 39 for some of them. I'm at 20 for some of them. So it's trying to even out the look of that. All right, next we have Retrace. So I'm going to come down here to this gray, and I'm going to turn Retrace on. And what Retrace does is it goes forward and then all the way back through the form so that it ends where it began. So you get kind of 2 sets of stitching. It goes all the way forward, all the way back. And if I take it out of 3D and I have expanded stitches turned on for this, you can see these little plus marks. This is where I turned that on. Toggle expanded points. You can see, yep, all those needle penetrations line up perfectly. Now, if I choose to offset this, so let's offset it by 10, because that should be about half of our stitch length. And I hit apply. Now you can see that it's now sinking stitches halfway between the other ones. Now, if I'm in 3D, you're not really going to see this because you're only seeing the top stitches, but you can see if you have expanded toggled on for that element, you can see the other penetrations underneath. So what this does is it kind of splits the difference. Why would I do that? Well, it takes the needle penetrations and it offsets them so that not everything lines up. You're not pulling the holes in the garment as much, and it gives it almost a more natural look as opposed to the more kind of separate individual stitch look. It it hides the stitch definition. So it kind of splits the stitches going back, and it hides those needle penetrations. It hides that stitch definition, and it gives you a little bit more of a organic or more natural look. So I'm going to turn this back off. And then let's look at this next one, which is curve compensation. So here I've got two curves. It's just kind of S curves, and I've lengthened my stitch length for these. And you can see that I am sinking needle penetrations wherever I have those points. And the one on the right tends to follow the curve a little bit better. Smaller stitches follow curves better because you just can't curve a line between 2 points. You can't curve a stitch. So the smaller the stitches, the better it follows the form. Now, if you wanted longer stitches, this one has curve compensation off, and it does kind of the best it can with the specified stitch length and dividing stitches between those input points. So it's trying to kind of make that even, make it do what you've asked it to do. With curve compensation on, it will sink a few more needle penetrations along that curve. And so it will shorten stitches where the curves get tighter. It still tries to respect your stitch length for the most part, but then when it gets a little bit tighter, it will shorten those stitches to follow that curve a little bit better. It is on by default, and this is something that you will not really notice unless you are looking at tight curves and you're really paying attention to the stitch length. But what it does is it follows those curves a little bit better. Okay, so let's look at a different stitch type. Let's go in and look at bean. And that really didn't change very much on screen, but actually let's go back to normal. If I look at my stitch count for this element, I have 10 stitches. If I change it to bean, I now have 30. So what it does is it goes forward, back, forward for every stitch. And you can change stitch length, obviously, but you can change the thickness to kind of any odd number. It needs to be an odd number to keep going forward. So you can go forward, back, forward, forward, back, forward. And the needle penetrations line up, but the stitches tend to just kind of fall just slightly to the sides of each other. So they kind of balloon out a little bit on the side, and it gives it kind of a bean look. Some people will call this like a triple walk or something like that. It is a way to make the linear elements a little bit bolder, a little bit stronger. And it is 3 threads thick. So a walk normal is 1 thread thick. A walk retrace is 2 threads thick. And a walk bean is 3 threads thick. It's almost Seussian. That's a little bit hard to say. The difference visually between 1, a walk normal, and 2, a walk retrace, is kind of noticeable. It's like, wow, that walk retrace is a little bit bolder. The difference between 2, a walk retrace, and 3, a walk bean, is far less noticeable to the eye. So if you are doing a lot of kind of finer detail on littler stuff, and you're having to walk in and out and go around elements, it is far more common, at least for me, to do 3 threads thick and 2 threads thick to get in and out of forms rather than just the 1 and the 2. So I tend to use a walk bean and a walk normal retrace when I'm doing that kind of red work, black work kind of look. I rarely do just a walk normal for those kinds of things. Walk normals for me tend to be exceedingly fine detail, which is rare for me, or mostly just travels, whereas beans and walk retraces tend to be more visible kind of stitching. You could turn retrace on for a walk bean, but be careful. That just means you're getting 3 going one direction and 3 going back. Okay, so let's look at the next one, which is jump. And all my stitches go away. This, not even really a stitch type, it is a machine movement. From here to here, don't stitch. So we call them a jump stitch. It is a machine movement. A lot of times this even gets filtered out when it goes to the machine software. So it's not something I use overly often. It is something you may see in older designs meant for older machines to make the machine move without stitching. You will also see it in expanded designs. That's what those dotted lines are. All right, let's look at something a little bit more fun, and let's look at a walk decorative. So here, and this is pretty small, so let's scale this up. A walk decorative, let's zoom out, is a pattern, and you can even see that it's a satin pattern for this one. A walk decorative allows you to select a pattern to flow along that linear path. So let's do something like this. And if you curve that path, it will rotate that element and follow along that path. So walk decorative is nice for a linear kind of decorative motif that goes throughout or along a form. And for your options, you can change the width. So I could make this wider. I could make it shorter. And they're all based on the original element size. So that kind of decorative pattern element. Let's go back to 100 for each of those. And then you also have the option of auto adjusting, and you can choose to change the space of the elements. So the space between them, or none, which none, I don't know if you saw it kind of shift, but now I don't go all the way to the end. So it will use the exact pattern at the exact size, and it will get most of that. But if you don't have enough to complete the shape for another one, if I extend this out, we'll get another one. It's hard to get it to line up. There we go. Pretty close. You'll get one added. You'll get one taken away depending on the length of the line. Or you can have it auto adjust either the space or the size. I tend to like size because it just looks the fullest. And then you also can adjust the spacing. So I could have it space these out a little bit more. And then we get these kind of odd travels happening. Typically, the patterns are designed to start and stop exactly so that they line up this way. So I tend to leave spacing at 100. I will occasionally play with width and height, and I usually leave auto adjust to size. The last stitch type we have to look at is a sequin. And you know what? No. Let's look at one more decorative. So there's another one. But one thing you may notice is maybe this one looks... Actually, that one did okay on a path. Some of them are larger and not really meant for a path. Some of them look better. This one would look pretty funny as a path. It's meant more as a fill. So these same patterns get reused as decorative fills. So occasionally you'll come across one, it's, wow, it's really weird as a path. Well, yeah, it's meant more for a fill. Okay, so let's change our stitch type to sequin. And this is just meant for creating designs for machines with sequin attachments. Those are the properties for walk elements. Take a look at them, play with them, and see what you think.